People in the back. Okay, Kenzo says I have to be serious. It's a really serious. That was serious. All right. Everybody's having such a good time. It's hard. It's hard when you have this good of a time. We're just going to keep having a better and better and better and better time. I think I see, is that Ted Sod in the back? I think I see Ted Sod. I think I see Dan Capone. I see Brad Kirshner.
Gene McDonald.
I see Gene McDonald. And with Meg.
I see Meg Cater.
Meg and Gene are still talking. I see Steve, Steve, one of our co-founders, isn't even listening to us right now. That's amazing. Wow, look at, and he's just blatantly ignoring us right now. That's kind of awkward. Yeah, we do. And then I see our freestyle artist, Ben Williams, is continuing to freestyle through the form of speech.
You have to come back. Sorry, everyone. Sorry. You have to
try to pull yourself away from these extraordinary conversations that you're having in the context of unlimited possibility. We want you to be able to engage with Tom and ask her questions. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
Steve, if you keep talking, I think we're going to have to break up the band. I don't know.
All right. All right. Welcome back, everyone. All right. That was amazing. And we're going to call back Elizabeth and Tom, and anybody can feel free to ask some questions, and we'll keep the dialogue going. Tom, Elizabeth?
All right, we have our first question. John, you have to project?
I can project, yeah. Excellent, I really enjoyed your presentation. I had a quick question, just so you know. Hi. My name's Jonathan, and I really enjoyed your presentation. And just so you know, I'm a organizational development consultant at Integrated Forum. And I thought your presentation was, I was thinking through some of my changes. You talked a lot about who you were speaking to, about getting ready to change or ready for something different. Which is one of my favorite models is about unfreezing. Like getting people, we're moving on from this materialist worldview to something new. And then the next stage of the change is we move and then we get people into new behavior. So I was wondering if you could go beyond and talk about how where people can find role models and what these new behaviors are the way for people who are curious and how people can acquire these new ways of being and help make them stabilize them in their world.
I thought those 5 people who were up here earlier were kind of awesome role models. I think what's interesting is if you're really interested in what's new, you have to dare to be a role model yourself, even if you don't know what the heck you're doing in a certain kind of way. You know, because we're talking about creating at the edge of what we don't already know, and being with each other in the life process, as the life process, and finding out. And the context that we're in will dictate how that works. You know, if you're at work, it's different than if you're engaging with your family or your Loft Session team. But I think that there are. I think once you realize that you can choose to be in this possibility or not, then you begin to be a role model if you choose to take that on. I mean, that's what, I don't know.
There was something interesting about the role model, because on one hand you do need role models, we all need role models, but how do you relate to role models? Because what we are talking about, you can't model. the moment you relate to it as something you can model, basically you are completely in trying to figure out how to do it. Versus really engaging the fact that we all don't know how to do it. And there's something, of course, we're always engaging in higher possibilities, and people who are kind of manifesting higher possibilities are role models.
Right.
But in the end, we have to do it ourselves, and the way you do it yourself is always completely new, also.
Right.
So there's some daring thing and stuff to respect role models, because it's really important to really see, wow, that there are people who are manifesting something that one inspires to, but in the end, to realize that one has to do it oneself in engaging with the process as it is right now. There is no role model for the situation that we are engaging right now. There is in some way, but in some way, if I don't recognize that there's something completely just as it is right now, and I don't know how to respond, we don't know how to respond, that in this something is possible in our engagement, then the process becomes alive. So it's interesting. I love role models, but we also have to see there's a danger in role models to just try to model them, because then it becomes a dead process. The thing is only alive if it's alive, and that's the beauty of it.
So experimentation.
That's a big part of it, I think.
I agree.
Hello everyone, I'm Esther. This is actually my third time in a row being here at Loft Sessions. The only one I missed, unfortunately, was the first one. Good friends with Steve, we worked together both as consultants at HubSpot. And adding on to what you're saying, the whole idea of trying to figure out how to really grow, I think really just comes from self-awareness. So this is something that, as consultants we're really taught how to do things like Dr. Tom said, of actively listening, of really paying attention to the things that people are telling you, the interactions that you're having with one another, the interactions and experiences that you have with yourself, and really trying to look within and figure out what are those, what's that growth essentially that you need to make. I think as human beings we're afraid to identify, things within us that are flawed. I don't think anyone wants to think of themselves as flawed, but as human beings, that's part of what makes us human. And so rather than looking for a role model, I think it really just begins with just being self-aware and just really trying to identify what are those key characteristics within yourself that you want to improve upon in order to become a better human being, in order to really grow both intellectually, spiritually, emotionally, and then actively listening to the people that you're interacting with on a regular basis to figure out, what are these things that I can learn from these people to better identify what those things are that I need to, essentially be improving upon on a regular basis.
Cool.
You can project. I can project, yes. So in the interest of learning, I just came back from the Social Innovation Conference at the United Nations.
The mic would be good.
Okay. Mic it is. So this is a conference, happens every year. There are actually a bunch of conferences across the world like this, but the nature of these conferences are that people that are invited to speak are social entrepreneurs or social innovators who have actually identified a problem, and they're out in the world solving the problem. So I'm finding this a very interesting juxtaposition, because in my world I would kind of say this is theory. I'm sure you would disagree. But in getting to culture and getting to solutions, one suggestion would be you just can't wait around to get to culture. And in fact, if you really want to solve the problem, you got to build the culture on the job. And so these represent examples of that. And I'll throw out a couple, and then I'd love to hear your responses to that juxtaposition and whether that's the right way, wrong way, or another way. I don't know. Probably aren't any right or wrong ways. But Room to Read is a great example. This is a gentleman, looks a lot like me, who decided that one of the biggest problems in the world was the rest of the world didn't have libraries. And so he set out to solve that problem. And when you think about our conversation and all of the soft skills that you might talk about in trying to solve that problem, that's not what he focused on. He wanted a hard skill. And his hard skill was he wanted to open libraries faster than Starbucks opens coffee places. And he throws a chart up right in front of you and says, this is the Starbucks opening rate, and this is our library opening rate. And his library opening rate is roughly double the Starbucks opening rate. And when you hear him talk, you know he's also built a culture. But I don't think the culture was the real lead. It was going after beating Starbucks' opening rate and building libraries. How many of you know what Donors Choose is? Okay, so Donors Choose has put up over $1 billion into school projects, mainly across the United States, where individuals fund a project in the school of their choice proposed by teachers at those schools. And when you heard Charles Best up in front of this audience of about 600, he was operating at a level of understanding of how you motivate those people who come to his site that was just mind-boggling. And the amount of time he would have spent having the theory conversation would have been in the hours. And then he was out testing, learning, testing, learning, testing, learning, testing, learning. And he's come to the point where his intimate understanding of how you solve that problem and the culture to support it is just way beyond anything anybody else in the world knows. So I guess my question is, do you lead with theory and culture, or do you just go find a problem to solve? Because we're long problems. We may be short culture, but we're definitely long problems.
One thing, I don't think the theory just doesn't do it. What we do need is practice, and you need practice of all different kind of things to create culture. And one approach is really to see how human engagement is very much held by the consciousness and the focus that we hold. And one thing that we do in Germany right now, in this field that we're doing practice in conversation, that you can experience that there's a different way of engaging that is aware of the process nature of human engagement. And that you're aware that there's a different focus point, how you can engage just by putting your mind and your consciousness on something that is emerging between us as we are communicating versus my point of identity or even our point of identity as a group, or just to experiment this in the way we are engaging allows something different to emerge between us. And you need some theory to understand what you're doing, but in fact it's like driving a bicycle. You need to get a sense of a different possibility of human engagement. And this is one practice, of one social practice that does have the potential of human change. It's not the only one. I think there are tons of things we need to do together, but one thing is really to realize there is something particular in our Western cultures that we call hyper-individualization, where our point of identity is completely individualized in a way that hasn't been the way in human culture before. And there's something very, very positive about it, because individuation allows a sense of responsibility. Only if I have a highly developed I sense, I realize that I have the power of choice, and the power of choice is identical with the power of responsibility. But in the same sense, there's a sense of isolation around it, like the individual would have arisen out of isolation. In fact, even our individuality is a process of a collective culture. It's a collective culture, and to see that when we are talking, it's never happening in isolation, it's always happening in cooperation. And as a field evolving further, you practice a different form of consciousness. And this practice allows us, I think, to come together beyond ego. And it's a form of practice that I think is a very powerful thing to allow us to create a creativity and also a form of social interaction that is beyond where our culture is at this point.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that so many of the problems that we're engaging with can't be handled or can't be addressed by an individual. You don't have sort of the lone individual kind of riding out on their horse, like solving problems. We have to work with each other. And it's in working with each other that we usually run into the roadblocks. So the process that we're speaking about and the willingness to engage in a sort of like you described, that the kind of testing and constant experimentation, the kind of trying to find out, that living in that space and learning how to do that with other human beings until there's something that begins to emerge that is a solution that no one person would have come up with. That living from that place is a practice that allows us to kind of cultivate human creativity through a collective, with the collective knowledge and wisdom of all the participants that can bring us to something different. And I think that's why this is a practice that can move to a different solutions. So it's a foundational thing, it's not an either theory, or it's a practice, not a I'm going to solve problems in culture. It is a way of being able to engage so that we can deal with the things that are confronting us.
This may be a difficult or unpopular question. It strikes me that in both of your careers, in gender and in dealing with Nazi Germany and facing that, you've dealt with situations where there's very complicated issues of complicity. I want to go back to the marathon, and I want to say that for me personally, it was hard to deal with, and I wasn't anywhere near the way you guys had to deal with it, but it was so much easier to deal with when we felt totally innocent and just outrageously assaulted, right? And then whether or not this was the motive of the terrorists, a door opened for me that it appears the motive of the terrorists was to make us feel how it feels when innocent civilians are killed for no reason, which we've been doing in Afghanistan and Iraq, and the horrible killing in London of a soldier recently. Same source was cited. I actually took notes on this because I didn't want to fuck it up when I tried to stand up. So it was so much easier to parse and process the marathon for me when it was us versus faceless evil. What if the terrorists believed themselves as justified as our government felt trying to end World War II without atom bombs? What if that was the logic one used to convince the other that, net this would be horrible, but less life overall will be lost because these other things will end? So easy question, right? How do we accept and acknowledge the potential darkness in all humans instead of glossing over and presuming our innocence? And in particular, Tom, you were just discussing responsibility. In what ways are we all responsible for civilian deaths in our wars, and what do we do with that? Right? That's just what I've been struggling with since.
Great struggle.
May I say something?
Yeah.
Because I think it's very related to one question that I'm just very involved in dealing with German Nazi past, because the whole question about evil and human nature, particularly when you come from a German culture, you're in a very interesting position. You are in the midst of it. It is part of your cultural heritage. Even if you are the next generation, this is part of your making. So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with that? And interesting enough, I think the German culture for something like 60 years basically dealt in two ways with it. One was denying it, and the other was being trapped in a guilt trap. They kind of frozen by guilt. And both had the same effect. Both really did not face the fact that something came from people participating, and it was not. I'm not talking about the main perpetrators. I'm more talking about everyone else of us who kind of allowed it to happen. And the only way to really deal with it, I think, first to see that it's part of yourself. Because also in my own kind of biography is interesting. There was a time where I was politically very active and I was very anti-Nazi and everything in Germany. But the way I dealt with it, it was very easy. I blamed my father generation. So to blame the father generation, it's very easy for you. You are already on the right side when you do that. And then when you look, wait a moment, it was very, very interesting recognition that the way how we dealt with it had quite similarities with the very things that we were fighting against. The kind of inhumanness can be kind of incorporated for whatever you're doing. And it's a recognition that is, in the end, a very personal recognition that basically this is part of yourself. But in the end, I think to realize that on one hand you see this potential of just evilness, but on the other hand you see also your potential as a person or as a culture to respond to that. That makes a lot of a difference, because right now I see in Germany a kind of a shift that I'm very hopeful about, because there is a potential that at least in parts of German society people realize that there's a responsibility to show that a whole culture can take responsibility and can find a human response to something that is as human as this was. And if this is possible, if a culture can find this response, that is something that's important not only for Germans, that's important for us as human beings. Because it shows that even something like the Holocaust, you can find a human response to it, individually and as a culture. And interesting enough, as the experience, the moment you realize that this is something that is not only guilt, but also a possibility, because you can prove something as a human response, the whole situation changes. Because if you come out of the guilt trap, you find a responsibility to show a different possibility. And that's something that opens up. And I think all this spectrum in yourself, and to see also that you as an individual, you're just part of this process, because it's very interesting, being German or Austrian in my sense, you're born into a situation, I didn't choose it, but it's me. And how to respond to it, you only respond to it really deeply when you just accept that you're part of the cultural process. And you have to take responsibility that you're part of this cultural process. You are, because it's your making. And it's beyond my personal choices, it's just where I came into and what I have to take responsibility for. And when you realize, that's true for all of us, we are part of one human process, and the only thing what we can do is take responsibility for that. And then something powerful can rise out of it. So, I don't know if this is an answer, but...
I also just wanted to say that it's very powerful that you yourself saw, like, oh, we're not just faced with faceless evil here. That actually there was a message in this, a message that has to do with what the United States has been doing, and what does that, and realizing that this is, I can't separate myself from that, and the fact that the way this is being talked about in the media, the way this is being engaged with, is a reflection of our shared culture, our shared cultural values. So you're opening up the question yourself, realizing that we Americans like to shut the door on these things, that we pretend that we're, that none of this is going on, or we have ways, all kinds of ways of shielding ourselves, and that we do that as individuals also. I think the more doors we open, and more willingness that we have to have these conversations and recognize that we're not separate from them, that they are the stuff that we're made out of, the more possibility that we have of creating a different cultural space that something different can happen from.
We have time for 2 more questions.
I was just hoping you could talk a little bit more about gender, because I know that's something that you focused on a lot in your studies, and you guys were talking about the ego and how the ego is sort of comes out of identifying ourselves and labeling ourselves as something that is separate from the whole, but we are sort of on one side of gender. Or I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about how gender plays into the theory of this unity.
I think what's really interesting is that if you close your eyes and you just sort of open your awareness, there is no gender there. The deepest part of ourselves, the deepest part of who we are in our humanity is not male or female. It's just awareness, it's just aliveness, it's just human. And when you realize that that is who we are most fundamentally, and then you go, oh, but here I am embodied as a young woman, then it becomes a very interesting question. What do I do now? But you're coming from a place where you're not separate from, where you're not divided from the opposite sex, where you're not divided from other women because you're trying to figure out how you're going to find a partner and get ahead and so forth. But you're coming from a place where your own individuation as a young woman is seen as part of a human process that you need to take forward. That what you do in your life, how it is that you move forward in your life, is a template for the women who come after you. And is part of your responsibility as a human being to move this process forward. So male, female, it's the most primary part of ourselves is beyond these divisions that have been created in culture. And when you see that, then it's like, oh, how can I break those things down in culture to find out what could be released among women, among men, when we don't come from these boxes.
In fact, it's interesting because something that Elizabeth and I are talking quite a bit about. What does it mean, or how does it change everything when you realize that in the end, our identity is bigger than gender. It's deeper than gender. And then from there, realizing, however you want to call it, consciousness, humanity, or whatever, there's something that's beyond all this, which we all share. And the deep realization of that, and then also realize that all the differences, they're also there. That I'm Austrian, I'm male, that's all part of our identity, but it comes from a different point when the deep realization that something beyond is in the end more important. And it's and to hold this really changes the game. It changes also the gender game. And I think it's a very interesting discussion because I think it's very important to realize that there's a way to look into the differences from a different point of view. Not to negate them, but to have a different perspective on them. And then find how, from this perspective, how can they all be integrated? And it's just an ongoing discussion, though. I think it's a big question.
I think it's a really critical question because so much of our culture is based on these kinds of divisions. The divisions between male and female, the divisions between the masculine world, the public world, and the feminine world of home. They're part of the things that make us crazy, right? But I think that it's the importance of finding a different place from which we can engage with the whole conversation is so important to get us beyond that division itself. And only when we come from beyond the division itself do we have a chance to actually create something different. From within it, it will only keep it. So that's why realizing this deeper part of ourselves and realizing and starting to look from there rather than from my fixed identity as a woman, as a whatever, opens up different possibilities, things that you wouldn't have thought of from within that, that existing identity. But it's like how men and women are with each other, how women are with each other, how men are with each other is culture. So coming at that from a different place starts to really change the templates that we have for human culture.
Time for one more, please.
Brief answer.
I think the shift that you're talking about in cultural evolution and so well articulated, when it comes out in stories like the example of the library or this confrontation of oneself, and I think this is where we as an audience can kind of bring that out. I mean, this part really feels dynamic in a way because it's like examples and stories, and I think that's, like I was thinking about my life, you know, of what's an example. And last week, I live in co-housing in Cambridge, and if you are familiar with it, it's kind of a village life. And we're neighbors, and one of our members died last week. And what he brought to us was, we really acted as neighbors. This wasn't our best friend, or a parent, or a cousin, or... And the amount of love that kind of poured out with all our grudges that we have for 12 years, and you know, stuff happens when you live together. And I think that was a cultural evolution in our small little microcosm. And the last words that he said to the community, as you know, he had a few days, was, let go of your grudges. So I think it's our stories based on these wisdoms and these teachings that you're bringing here that are vital. And the more that we can kind of see in our lives what they are, they come alive in a way. So thank you for the talk.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that was terrific.
Okay, you get the last word.
All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to break up a little bit. We're going to move these tables so you can dance and also mention dance. So our band's going to come on, the Stretch Collective, very shortly. So feel free to mingle, keep drinking or doing whatever you want to do. And we'll be back on in about 5-10 minutes.
And our next Loft Session will be here on Saturday, June 29th. Please put that in your books. And for all the setup crew, if we can come up and we can move these tables so we can dance. All right. Thank you so much. All right.